for Senator Ted Cruz, right? Even though he's an immensely effective senator, he's also sort of a doink, and no one actually thinks he's impressive. In contrast, I would bring up the example of Supreme Court Judge. Yes.
Can you please explain the diversity on the Supreme Court? This includes people from humble backgrounds, especially people of color and women.
So I would first point out that historically the Supreme Court has not been that diverse. I'd also point out that for the majority, it's still usually more restrictive in terms of who it's representing as a whole. I would also point out that the Supreme Court is still biased to people who have gone through certain structures of the current political system. Now, I would point out that most people tend to respect Supreme Court judges' rulings because they're viewed as experts on law, viewed as experts on the Constitution, and most of all, viewed as people who can objectively look at how the Constitution operates. Now, that doesn't mean that they necessarily agree with the rulings. Obviously, in the case of Roe v. Wade, that was not the case. However, it's important to acknowledge that this is a light point of agreement that right now almost doesn't exist between the two parties. And I think that's important to maintain. Now, moving on to my new point of constructive, which is that that if this motion were to happen, it would rid the necessity of democratic mobilization. And what I would point out about this is that if the Supreme Court is viewed as the legislative branch, this would actually damage the ability for progressive policies to go through. And what do I mean by that? Well, let's look at the most successful examples of progressive Supreme Court rulings. I'm going to refer to the 2012 ruling on gay marriage. Now, what I'd point out is that a good chunk of states had already legalized gay marriage. There's already popular support for that. And here's the thing, that's usually the case for a lot of these Supreme Court rulings that do end up being effective. Like the Byrd v. Brown case also had a large population for it. That's why it was an effective ruling. When Supreme Court rulings don't have that wide popularity across the country, then we get Roe v. Wade, which I brought up at the beginning of the speech, was not effective due to lower courts. So if we want effectiveness in progressive policy, you actually need people to care and to mobilize, and to protest, and to do all these things, and to push senators through for, say, I don't know, the actual legislative branch. So if we want that, and we have this essentially crutch, which is the Supreme Court, in which we can say, well, the Supreme Court will push through it because they will misinterpret the Constitution to say what we want, will allow LGBT people to continue as much as we want, then first of all, it's not good ground, it's not good foundation for further policy. Further, it's not an effective understanding of how we can push these issues. We should always emphasize the legislative branch. That's where you get permanent change. We should always emphasize these communities. That's where we get permanent change. The Supreme Court is not an actor for permanent change. It has never been. It's always based on popular opinion and how the legislative branch is running. Thank you.
Thank you very much. To open the closing half, the member of government. Yeah.
Unfortunately, opening half, we believe, has missed the nuance as to explicitly why it is urgent and necessary right now as to why liberal courts must act beyond just protections of certain minority groups. I'll bring to you four things actually. 1, responses. 2, why constitutional rigidity is bad. 3, on the urgency. And 4, on the necessity. But first, responses. The closing words of opening opposition, I think, flow entirely over to government's side, in which they say that we need to prioritize the legislature. This is exactly the point, that the Constitution and the constitutional rigidity of the Supreme Court has been used to shut down the national legislature repeatedly throughout history. I'll get to this later, but essentially what we're saying, by agreeing with this, we think that this goes over to Gov. Now, moving down. they talk about like lower courts being garbage and there's no way to actually solve them. We think that the Supreme Court can actually pressure these courts, and we see that, like, look, the mechanisms that open government provides for, like, pressuring these courts into doing things, we don't think they act like completely independently of the Supreme Court. We think that there is a level of pressure, and that if the actual upper level happens, there's a much higher chance of like actual progressive policies flowing down than anything that they get on their side. Secondly, they start to talk about why the Supreme Court will start to be treated as a legislative branch. We think that, and I'll get to this later in my speech, that the status quo inherently biases conservative policy, and why there's no way to actually solve for the future unless these policies and laws are instituted. Now they talk about, and then go on to talk about like, essentially the politicization of the Supreme Court. We think the politicization of the Supreme Court is occurring already. Like, even when they try to maintain like constitutional rigidity, which, like, I'll get to why that's not necessarily even a good thing, but even under the status quo, it's still being particized, and even when rulings are made, so there's still vast amounts of population that just refuse to agree anyway. We think that by giving more power to the legislature branch, this will better solve. Lastly, they talk about like essentially their entire case. I'll get to in my own. Now, on what closing government provides to. Our first contention is on why constitutional rigidity is bad. The Constitution itself is incredibly hard to amend. Over the last 250 years, there have only been a couple dozen, if not more, a couple dozen amendments to the actual Constitution. Not only this, the actual creation of the Constitution was not created as some like great document to herald great progressive rights and ensure equality for everyone. No, it was created by a group of wealthy landlords who rose up against the British because they didn't like high taxes on them. Then, when creating their own government, they instituted a form of government that was highly distrustful of both the poor, and of minorities. You can see this because senators weren't even directly elected. They were elected by state legislatures, which not only weren't elected by everyone, they were only elected by wealthy white-owning men. What we see is that the inherent structure of the Constitution wasn't even created to be a good framework under which to operate to actually give proper framing for the future. Now, what does this then look like throughout history? We think that what this has looked like through history is the Constitution constantly being used as a weapon to hold back social movements through very landmark rulings. We see this in the Dred Scott ruling, in which like slavery was upheld. We see this through women. We see this with gay rights, trans rights, in which gun regulation laws have constantly been struck down because of the Second Amendment. And we see most perniciously that businesses have been ruled as people, essentially, in the 1880s, during the golden era of business, Supreme Court rulings. Not only this, stemming from this then, the Constitution has been used to flip around to help pro-business interests by essentially legalizing mass lobbying to an extent that is like unseen in the rest of the Western world. To the point at which there can't actually be any progressive policies passed in the legislature because the courts are controlled, because the courts have ruled that that companies are essentially allowed to run elections, which means progressive movements can't actually win anything to remove the actual control over the Supreme Court to actually reverse any of these rulings. This is why constitutional rigidity is bad, because it constantly holds back the country from actually achieving these things. Now, this means that if you can liberal courts actually implement things that are more progressive and actually care about these things, we think that this gives an actual legal precedent for the legislature to then be empowered to actually push forward these kinds of reforms. Now, why does the legislature actually enable itself to push forward these things? Well, because what we see is that the Supreme Court right now is insanely powerful. Way more powerful than it was set up under the Constitution itself. The Constitution didn't give the right to the Supreme Court to strike down laws because they found it unconstitutional. That itself is a right that the Supreme Court gave to itself, which means the whole basis of the opposition case is based on a right founded in the Constitution that isn't even part of the Constitution, but the Supreme Court interpreted for itself. No, thank you. What this then means is that essentially at the end of the day, nothing actually matters, because we think that law constantly changes. If we were to have this debate in the 1930s, we would say, oh look, we should continue to disenfranchise people because like the Constitution is key. We think that this is a bad mindset, because if at any point throughout history you apply this and see that the current status quo is far better, we think that we then ought to value a more progressive future. Now, why is this an urgency? We think that this is an urgency for multiple reasons. We think that when the Constitution, we think that right now, the vast control and the vast size of the United States and the vast amount of corporate control over elections, and just through like lobbying of the billions of dollars of level, was completely unforeseen, and maybe was foreseen, but we believe it's unforeseen by the founding fathers. They didn't possibly interpret all of these things. What this means is that there's an absolute urgency for liberal Supreme Courts to actually act now. Because the problem is, as time goes on, one, climate change will continue to increase without any actual curbs on businesses, which can't happen in the status quo. You won't actually actually get any solutions to climate change. Not only this, inequality entrenches itself. And as each generation goes on, as the gap continues to grow, these things entrench. It gets harder and harder to actually revoke inequality as time goes on, which means you have to act now. And as you continue to wait in the long span that the opposition wants you to wait, it means you won't actually get any good solutions until it's way too late. This is why you have to act now, because mega businesses continue to control the narrative and continue to control all of this. But before I go on, does anything for opening? Closing?
Yeah,
No.
so you said,
Oh, sure, sorry.
so you said that it's harder to revoke inequality as the future goes on, but what we're saying on our side is that the function of the Constitution is to provide a grounding for morality. Because you say that it's harder to revoke inequality, but we think that it's important for this to still be grounded in the Constitution, because without that you have instability and oscillation.
Yeah, okay, so we think that progressive values isn't necessarily anti-constitutional. We think that there can be good things that progressive judges can still do. That just because a progressive wants inequality doesn't mean they're just going to completely throw out start shooting conservatives. We don't think that this is the counterfactual that we have to deal with. We think that what will likely happen is that I'll respond to this by going to the third point as to why this is a necessity. We think that conservative courts in the status quo inherently start restricting access through the support through voter ID laws, through the support of reducing union protections, and through the support of business lobbying. What this essentially means is that progressives can never actually win elections because this big business will never actually allow them to fully achieve their victories. What this then means is that they have no actual access to the legislative branch because the Supreme Court has essentially blocked all of their access to the legislative branch to actually make any difference in what they want to do. This means that the moral basis that the closing government will likely come up here and talk about, we believe is far less necessary than actually solving the problems and actually giving a solvency for liberals to continue to win, whereas the status quo is inherently conservative bias and status quo bias. For all these reasons, I strongly urge it. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And let's have the member of opposition. Here.
We know that in this debate, both sides want to get both benefits and to get the most benefits for the minority groups and for the marginalized groups. However, the problem is which side of the house can get most benefits and especially most stable and long-term benefits for these groups. So we said the other side of the house we can give you most stable and long-term benefits. Why? First, we need to come to the important. Well, I will do some rebuttal to the government, and then I'll give you the reason why it's more important, for the liberals to come to not misinterpret the Constitution because of the importance of the Constitution, because of the characteristics of Supreme Court, because we have other better alternatives that the Congress already has a mechanism to give to pass bills and to do a policy that can change the things that can benefit the minority groups in a more stable and long-term way. And what's the harm will happen if we allow the liberal Supreme Court to to misinterpret the Constitution? So first, some last rebuttal. The CG comes up and tells you that Constitution has been used to shut down those policy changes for marginalized groups. However, we know that those constitutions has been used because these people are already conservatives. So it doesn't matter why this constitution exists in here. These conservatives will always be conservative voices in the Congress that oppose those policies. So even if we add more, add more new things to constitutions, these conservative voices will not change. So it doesn't matter whether we add new things to or misinterpret the constitutions. And the second thing to tell you is that it is most urgent and necessary for Supreme Court to do that to pass bills, pass policies for the marginalized and minority groups. However, it doesn't matter whether we get a bill, we get a policy passed tomorrow. If we know that the policy will be changed, will be altered by conservative Supreme Court, in 1 year or in a few years, which will cause more instability and confusion for minority groups. So first, why it is important to have the constitutions? Because we know that constitutions principally is the foundation of our nation. This is set by the founding fathers, and it built the foundation for our nation and set the grounds for all our policies. And it kind of guide our society that runs through our founding to today in this 300 years. So like, why is this important to what the harm will cause if we allow the liberal Supreme Court to misinterpret the Constitution? First, it will open the possibility for the conservative Supreme Court to misinterpret constitutions. And this will be really harmful because if we allow this conservative Supreme Court to misinterpret the constitutions, we can't draw a line on whether, on like what constitution, which line of the constitution that we can misinterpret. We can't draw a line on like how to interpret, what is the acceptable ways to misinterpret the constitution. We don't know like what will happen once we misinterpret the constitutions. So there's basically no check on like what the misinterpretation is. So this is very harmful. Why? Because first, this will cause major negative long-term effects to the society because of three things. First, it will bring instability. Second, it will bring polarization. And third, it will be unproductive. So first, why is this unstable? Because we know that once the Supreme Court misinterprets the constitutions, then like before we know that before people, especially the marginalized groups, know like what the policies are there for them, right? So like once we allow them to misinterpret, the marginalized groups don't know like what choices they have. They don't know what the policy is going to be for the next day, right? So like it will cause more confusion and instability for marginalized groups, especially like when liberal Supreme Court have a liberal policies passed, and then like the conservative Supreme Court maybe pass another policies, and those policies back and forth will cause more confusion for the marginalized group. Like once gay marriage got passed by the Supreme Court, and then like the next few years, like gay marriage is being shut down by the conservative Supreme Court. So what should these gay couples do like once they get married, right? So this will cause more instability for the society as a whole. And second, it will cause more polarization for the Supreme Court. Why? Because first, we know that once liberal and conservative Supreme Court can pass their policy on their own side, the liberal Supreme Court, because they know that they are not acting as a kind of alternative for the Congress to pass the bills, they are more willing to pass the bills on their favor. So like they will pass more liberal policies and they will pass more liberal bills and pass more liberal rulings. And this is very detrimental to the functioning of the Supreme Court. And this polarization is what the citizens and the public don't want to see in a national stage. And the third is this will cause more unproductive because we cannot see long-term effect changes if like those policies are back and forth. We don't know once the policy gets passed, once people cannot be adjusted to this policy, then these policies go change because it's so easy for Supreme Court for conservative Supreme Court to pass the conservative policies. So because of these three negative benefits, we now come to why it's better for the Congress to do that. We know that the Congress, there's a popular check for the Congress. So like first, we see that there's popular check for the Congress. So like when Congress passes a bill, it must be approved by most of the people in the Congress. And what is very important for things, especially for minority groups. Sorry, no. Minority groups, because we know that through these policies, passing bills, they'll have more like media exposure to the policy and to the bills getting passed. So more people, more citizens will get to know this policy and will really get knowledge of like what the importance of this policy is and really think about that. So this will change the fundamental discrimination of those marginalized groups and really change their perceptions. And this is what we really want to achieve, not just the policy, but like the fundamental change in their perceptions. Sorry. And also like why it's better for Congress to pass these bills? Because we know that judges are not politicians. We know that judges study law and politicians study politics. These policies getting passed, especially to marginalized groups and minority groups, they have large social impacts. They impact the society like financially, socially, and in so many different aspects. So if we let the judge to decide like what is better for these marginalized groups, it is no way that we can know like what kind of social impact it will have. So this may cause like we don't know like we should let the expert to do their things, to let the politicians to know that what is better for society instead of let the judges studying law to do that. So why this is more important? Because we know that in our side of house, we tell you that we can give you a better, give you a long-term and more stable ways to, like to really passing the bills and to change the perception of people of the minority groups. So we said our side of house should be this space.
Thank you very much. I'd like to invite the government whip to close the debate here.